Before we start looking at adjustment layers in detail, let me just have a look at the before and after version of the shot so you can get an idea about where you're going with this edit. Now we're kicking off with this source file here. For starters, the color is slightly warm, so we're going to cool the color down and create a more natural looking skin tone. And also it's slightly underexposed and we're losing detail in the hair, so we can add more detail, texture and shine using adjustment layers. And we've also got a very flat contrast here. It's slightly underexposed, but here we've got a nicer range of shadows, midtones and highlights, and all these changes can be made using adjustment layers. But what are adjustment layers and why should you use them? Well, if you go to Enhance and use a command like Adjust Lighting, Brightness, Contrast to tweak the contrast of the shot, then you move on to Levels to lighten or darken specific tones. If you decided you wanted to undo the brightness contrast option, you'd first have to undo Levels. So you're stepping back through all of your edits in a linear fashion. Now the cool thing about adjustment layers is you can turn them on and off and you can swap them around. And this one here, for example, is changing the brightness and contrast. You can see it's changing the hair. This one is a photo filter adjustment layer. It's changing the temperature of the shot, warming up or cooling down colors. And Levels here is working on the shot's tones as a whole. So adjustment layers are non-destructive because you can turn them on and off in any order that you like. But that's stepping ahead of ourselves a little bit, so what we'll do is close this finish image first of all, and then we'll start with this image here, adjustment layers before.jpg, and I'll take you step by step through the tutorial. First of all, let's kick off by analysing the shot's range of tones. It looks underexposed, but just to make sure, we can go to Window and bring up a handy histogram, just like the one you get on the back of your camera. To make it look more like the one on the back of your camera, just change it to RGB and you'll see a nice black histogram graph. And it starts very strongly in the shadows. We've got some strong shadow information. It's fairly healthy in the midtones, but as we get towards the highlights, the level of the highlights are petering out until we get down to here. Now if there were some really truly white highlights, the graph would get all the way to the far right here. So that histogram is just giving us a diagnosis of our shot's spread of tones. And that's useful because we can use a histogram and an adjustment layer to fix the tonal problems of the photograph. So to do that, we need to get the layers palette up. So go to Window, Layers, which you'll find here. You might need to drag it out from the palette dock on the right and it'll float around like so. Now let's just squeeze this up a little bit so we've got more room, and we're going to create a levels adjustment layer with its own histogram. And to do that, you can click here and choose levels, and then you'll just have a histogram appear like this. You can dock it to the bottom of the layers palette so they're floating around together. You can also get adjustment layers from here by going to New Adjustment Layer and choosing one from this menu option like so. So there we have our levels adjustment layer, and you can see the histogram is very similar to the one we have in the histogram window, and we can now use this highlight input level slider to take the brightest highlights in the shot and give them an even brighter value. So if I drag that to the left underneath the highlights, around about here should do the trick. It's taking the brightest pixels in the shot, which are around about 230, and it's giving them a much brighter value of 255. So you can now see this histogram has slid all the way to the right to show the shot has now got a healthy spread of shadows, midtones and highlights. And the lovely thing about adjustment layers is the fact you can turn them on and off to see a before version of the image and an after, and you can compare your edits. So let's just click here on the little eye icon. There's the before. You can see the histogram's going back to its original position. Turn it on again. There's the after, and we've got our improved levels with our brighter highlights. And another cool thing about adjustment layers is you can have as many as you like. So let's try and bring out some of the shine in the hair using a brightness contrast adjustment layer. So to get one of those, we can click here, choose brightness contrast. You can see this is changing now, and we've got our new adjustment layer appearing in the top section. So let me just drag that down so you can see some more of those layers. And we've got two sliders here, so we can just slide these around until we're happy. So around about 31 should do for the brightness. Let's just tweak the contrast to around about -10, and let's see the difference that makes by turning things on and off. Look at the hair at the top, much shinier. Now the problem with increasing brightness contrast to bring out the hair shine is we're slightly blowing out the highlights. Let me turn that back on again. So what we need to do is target the adjustment to just change the hair. And to do that, we can click on this mask here, and Control and I will invert the mask and turn it black. And at the moment, that means the adjustment layer isn't having any effect on the layer below. But what we can do is paint on that with a white brush just to make it affect the areas that we want it to lighten, while the rest of the layer will remain untouched. So let's close up histogram for the moment. Let's get our tools palette up by going to tools, and what we need to do is grab a brush, and you can get that one here by selecting the brush tool. And let me just hit the tab bar to get the floating windows up again, and we'll see we've got the options bar at the top, and I can go to the brush preset picker and choose a nice soft edge brush of around about 300 by clicking here. And also what we want to do then is target the mask by clicking on it and setting this foreground color to white. If it isn't on white, just click here to get the default background and foreground colors, and then you're ready to start spraying the brush on the mask to lighten up these areas here. So as I spray, you can see that there's white appearing on the mask, and it's lightening up the specular reflections and highlights on our model's hair, like so. Let me just turn the layer on and off. You can see it's just affecting the hair. So I'm just going to carry on spraying down here to lighten a little bit more of the hair, and you can see the mask is updating as I spray. Now, adjustment layers are non-destructive because you can turn them on and off, as I explained earlier, but you can also edit the mask to show or hide the effect of the adjustment layers by changing the color. If we go back to black, we can now spray on the hair and restore the shot to its original state on the sprayed areas. Or we can go back to white again and reveal the effect of the adjustment layer by spraying. So white makes the adjustment layer alter the corresponding pixels on the main layer, and black stops the adjustment layer from making any changes. So it's a very cool non-destructive editing tool. And you can see it in more detail by just clicking Alt on the actual mask, and you can see the white areas are making the brightness contrast adjustment layer alter these parts of the photograph, while the black areas are protecting the rest of the shot from being altered. And to see the color version of your photograph, just click on this icon here, and there you go. Now you can also disable the mask temporarily by holding Shift and clicking on it, and you get this cross through the mask to say that it's being disabled. So the adjustment layer is now applying to the whole of the layer. If you shift click again, you can see the mask is now targeting the areas where we sprayed white just to lighten up the highlights in the hair. I keep going on about non-destructive editing, and adjustment layers do allow you to tweak the edits at any time. Unlike the main menu commands, you can actually go to levels 1, for example, and then adjust things like the midtones to bring out more midtone detail and lighten up the eyes, for example. So if I drag this midtone slider, the grey gamma slider, to the left, you'll notice the midtones are gently brightening up. If I go too far, then it's over the top, but I can tweak it at any time to take it down to about 1.16, and that just lightens up the midtones. Let me turn that on and off to show you the before and the after. So we can tweak any of our settings any time, giving us total freedom with our image adjustments. And we can even save this as a Photoshop document or a TIFF, and these adjustment layers will still be attached to the file, and we can change things further down the line. So we've got total freedom thanks to adjustment layers. Now you'll notice that we've brightened up the midtones, but we've got slightly burnt out arms now. Let me just Control plus to zoom in, hold space to get the hand tool, and let me turn this on and off again. We're actually blowing out some of the texture detail on the highlights of the arms. So what we need to do is protect these areas from the levels adjustment. So what we've got here is the opportunity to use another mask. So click on the levels mask, set foreground color to black. You can reduce the opacity to make more subtle incremental edits. If we take that down to about 32, we can then just click and spray on the mask, and you've got grey brush strokes instead of black or white, and that's a more gentle adjustment just to reveal the missing highlights. There's the before, there's the after. So we've now got the skin tones looking like they were at the very start for this area here, which doesn't need so much of an adjustment. But if you go to the face, before and after, you can see there's a much more dramatic adjustment. So masks are great at protecting certain parts of the layer. And while we're in the levels adjustment layer, I'm just going to tweak the blacks by dragging this up to around about 5, just to darken some of the rich brown hairs, but we still have that lovely shine from the brightness contrast adjustment layer at the top. Now to cool down the shot, because it's looking a little bit warm, we can go to the adjustment layer icon and choose photo filter. Then we can choose a cooling filter, which is this one here, around about cooling filter 80, and then just tweak that up to around about 29, just to cool down the shot and create more natural looking skin tones. There's the before, quite warm. There's the after, a little bit cooler. We've finished tweaking the adjustments now, so what we can do is just separate it and click here to close it, and then I'm just going to slide this down to show you all of the adjustment layers in their entirety. Now what we're going to do is combine the effects of all of these adjustment layers and create a new version of the shot, because then we need to tweak it using variations just to get rid of a slight magenta hue. So what you need to do now is to click on the top layer like so, and then press at the same time Shift, Control, Alt and E. You need a lot of fingers for this, and then what that does is it takes all of the adjustment layers and it applies them to the layer at the bottom, and you get a new image which is like a composite of all of the different adjustments. So we can then edit this shot here and tweak it using variations just to get rid of this magenta hue. So pop up to Enhance, go to Adjust Color, and then choose Color Variations down the bottom here, and you'll see we've got this window appearing. Next thing to do is just to change the amount to around about here, and target shadows. And to get rid of a magenta, you need to add a green color. So we can increase green by clicking a couple of times, and then click OK to apply the change. And now if we just turn this layer off, you'll see the original is slightly more magenta, and we've added a wee bit of green here just to get more healthy looking, less magenta skin tones.